All right, my friends, we had a rebuttal of sorts from the article I read the other day where it says, don't pay off your mortgage. So let's go on this. A little bit interesting. There's a rebuttal from an emailer, and then I'll share an article with you that I actually found quite informative along these lines. It's an interesting rebuttal. Let's read it. So my man Steve writes, he says, Josh, I could write a long email why paying off the mortgage early is the best way to go, but I won't. 2 points. Number one, the article you read about why you should not pay off your mortgage early was wrong in one place and left out another entirely. The 2% reduction in the value of the money every year would apply to everything. If you pay off the mortgage early, that is true for whatever else you do with your money. Run the numbers between a couple scenarios where you save the money after you pay off the mortgage and see how it compares. See, I don't know. That's a false equivalence, if you will, because we're not the guy. Look, first and foremost, I'm paying down my mortgage as quickly as I can, not denying that. So I am aligned with the people who don't have a mortgage. The issue wasn't about paying off it early and not. How can I say this? The issue was that the guy's argument wasn't that he didn't want you not to have a mortgage. He wanted you to have a mortgage. He was saying at the end of the day, even if you pay a couple extra payments, you're still going to have this debt that's going to carry on for years, over decades. In this case, I think his example was 18 more years. So even if you're paying it down early, the facts are, if you still have the mortgage, you don't have access to the equity or the cash if a calamity comes. So you can't get caught up in the idea of paying it off early and not paying it off early as if those are the only two options. He was saying, no, absolutely, paying it off early is fine. But while you're doing that, if you have a calamity, you cannot go to your bank and say, hey, I have all this extra equity built up because I've been paying it early. I need access to that equity in order to put food on the table. The bank won't allow you to do that. So I mean, does that make sense? It's weird. So I'm thinking about myself, your old buddy Josh. We got this house right here, which I love. Big fat mortgage, without question. I'm paying extra, what I say, $400 or $500 a month. I think $500 a month to it, which is great. But the facts are, this might knock off 5 years of my total debt on this house, and I won't be here for another, whatever that is, 20 years or something like that. I won't be here. So I'm not going to ever have this paid off. It just won't. But let's just presume I did. All right, so it knocks another 5 years off. I save, I don't know, $150,000 of interest, whatever it is. That's great. But between now and then, all that equity is a dead asset for me. It does nothing for me. And if I ever needed the money to put food on the table or something like that, I don't have access to it. Well, you can take a home equity line of credit. No, you can't. You can if you get it approved beforehand, right? Because if I don't know, get laid off from work or something like that, and you got no income, no bank's going to extend terms to you. It doesn't work like that. That's why I always say, if you are going to stay in your home, take out the home equity before you leave work, because you have at least locked that in. And part two of that is, as witnessed by the 2008 crisis, just because you have a home equity line of credit doesn't mean the bank won't shut you down at your most vulnerable time. Anyway, so Steve's thing here is having no mortgage versus having a mortgage. Well, I mean, I get that. Without question, we want you to have no mortgage. But the article was not those two things, are one or the other. There's a third thing. Paying off your mortgage, but you still have paying off your mortgage early, but you still have the mortgage, and now you need access to cash. Does that make sense? Because this is a big deal. Just because you're paying more towards your mortgage doesn't mean the mortgage goes away. It goes away quicker, but you still have many, many years of paying that sucker off. And within those many, many years, you could still have a big problem on your hands. So Steve talks about, so then he says, run the numbers between a couple scenarios where you save the money after you pay off the mortgage and see how it compares. I mean, this goes back to the guy's article too. So Steve's saying, look, now I have no mortgage. We'll say your mortgage is $2,000 a month. So now you can save that money. I unequivocally agree with that. Yes, it's great not to have a mortgage. You can save that money. But I mean, I can't just wake up one day and not have a mortgage. I just can't, and save that money. I was using that $2,000 on my mortgage. So if I'm paying $2,500 a month on my mortgage as opposed to $2,000 minimum principal and interest, I still have a payment for another 15, 18 years. That doesn't go away. So Steve's thing there is what you could do once that mortgage is gone, what you can do with that money to save up for an emergency fund. Man, Agree. But until then, it's going to be another 10, 15, 20 years of getting to that point, and I need emergency funds. I just, it's not this, again, another false dichotomy. It's not this or that. There's a third way here. Weird. And on top of it, he talks about the 2% reduction, everything else you do. It is, without question. But it's inherently a 2% reduction in your debt. Inflation destroys debt. That's why inflation destroys bonds. That's a fact. Why do you think the bankers charge more for long-term loans? Because they're more likely for inflation to eat away at it. I mean, this is just how it works, man. At the end of the day, a 30-year loan has more likely for inflation to eat away. And thus, because of that, they're going to charge you more than a 15-year or adjustable rate mortgage. That's what happens here. So the 2% reduction is absolutely correct on inflation. Inflation is eating away 2% of all assets, but the value of your home is increasing with inflation. I mean, if you look historically, houses appreciate with a rate of inflation for sure. The value of your debt is decreasing with the amount of inflation, as long as your debt's fixed. That's not debatable. Conversely, the value of your investable assets are increasing with inflation and the earnings you're getting year over year and or the dividend yield too. So that's the drawback about my man Steve's here. He's like, everything's being reduced in value. That's not true. The equity in your home is going up in value, at least with the rate of inflation. Your debt is, so you're getting this gap, this widening gap. Your equity is going up because it's keeping up with inflation. Your debt is going down because it's being destroyed due to inflation. And then if you're investing money, you have inflation plus dividends plus earnings. All right, so Steve says part two of this. So he talks about part one. Part two, I paid off my mortgage 3 years ago, and the freedom I feel cannot be measured in dollars. Any debt you have is voluntary bondage. I had a mortgage for many years, so I know the difference. If I had to do it over again, I would buy a smaller, less expensive house and pay it off with 5 years and move up when I saved enough. Side note, someone should not pay off their mortgage. I sit there and I just wonder. I don't understand. Well, this is side note. Someone should not pay off their mortgage early unless they have a backup savings account in case of job loss. That's what the whole article is about, man. It's about that whole thing. That was the whole article. You need a savings plan. You need to have liquidity in case of a job loss. I sit there and I wonder sometimes, man, come on. That's exactly what the whole article is about. And look, dude, I don't know what it's like. I mean, we had no mortgage when we lived in Phoenix for about 6 months. We had no mortgage when we first moved to Virginia for about 6 months. And then we could leave both those places easily to go into homes. I get it. Not having a mortgage is great. I can completely understand that. If you have the capacity not to have a mortgage and you're not hurting yourself for some other aspect with liquidity, you should. But the whole point comes down to just because you're paying your mortgage in advance doesn't mean you have no mortgage payment. Nuts. Anyway, so all right, so let's read this article here. Ditch the mortgage and maintain your financial freedom. This is from Concoda, September 6, 2018. You are willingly giving away a large portion of your net worth in order to become a slave to debt. And I'll just concur with what Steve says. If I had to do it in hindsight, I would have bought a smaller house. Without question, that's what I wrote my first book about. Don't get reverse eyes where you're like, oh my goodness, I can afford this? Because the bankers say, look, for another 2 cents per $1,000, you can have Corian as opposed to whatever countertops, you know what I'm saying? And you're like, oh, okay, then for another 2 cents, you can have a flushing toilet. And then another 2 cents, you can have a light switch. You got to be careful there because your eyes will all be like, whoa, it's a reverse sticker shock. You're like, really? I can afford all this? I'm telling you, I've been there. That's what I wrote my first book on. I would have, in hindsight, and don't buy into the school district just because you hear it's the best school district, because I'm just telling you, in hindsight, I would agree with Steve 100%. I'd have bought a less expensive house, paid that sucker off, then moved up when I had the money. I completely agree with that. Groupthink is a dangerous thing. It allows irrational and logical ideas to filter into the mainstream. There was a time in history where slavery became an accepted idea, but over time society came to accept that minority opinion that was a bad idea and needed to be abolished. Wilberforce, remember him, the Christian? You can't talk about Christianity because Christianity is evil. And Christians are the people who abolished slavery because we realized that we were not living Christian-like when we accepted it. So Wilberforce. Unfortunately, slavery exists today in a more humane form, debt. Well, slavery still exists. I mean, there are countries that it still exists. Let's not mince words here. There are still slaves today against their will, Sudan. But somehow no one seems to care about that because I don't even want to get into it. It frustrates me to no end. Whatever happened to Boko Haram girls? Remember that with Michelle Obama and her hashtag Save Our Girls, and then suddenly we did all the virtue signaling, and then Boko Haram just went on their way with their slave girls. Weird how that never caused any chaos, huh? I mean, Michelle Obama just Save Our Girls, and then just like that, gone. No one cared anymore because she did the virtue signaling, as did all the people. They'd virtue signal that we got to save our girls, and then just gone. And yet those girls are still enslaved, being impregnated at 11 years old, and no one cares. Most people agree that debt is a liability and definitely not an asset, but they seem to falter somewhere down the line. Introducing the most misunderstood and biggest liability of them all, mortgages, or as I'd like to call them, the endless conveyor belt of payments. I agree with that. They are without a doubt the most destructive financial instrument ever to be invented, and when it comes to the asset liability classification, they are wrongly defined by the majority as an asset. The funniest thing I hear regularly is that they are considered to be an investment. However, the individuals who subscribe to this idea through no fault of their own have succumbed to the endless tirade of propaganda from companies that participate in the housing market and government-run schemes. In particularly, mainstream media and mortgage companies who are in cahoots have played to people's weaknesses. They've blinded people from logic to reason. Therefore, the masses have sought no alternative or improvement to their never-ending conveyor belt of debt payments. And are mortgages an asset? Nothing can be further from the truth. Mortgages are not. I mean, anyone who says mortgages are an asset or you need a mortgage for the tax deduction, just run for the hills, man. You don't need debt to advance. Having debt to advance your financial well-being is just, you can't, that's just silly in of itself. It really is. Debt does not advance your financial well-being, advance your risk. The deposit is your greatest asset in disguise. The masses are allocating their capital and savings for a deposit on houses over many years instead of doing the most important thing in life, which is investing in themselves. The truth is, when you take on a mortgage and pledge your initial capital, you are giving up your willingness to learn how to put that money to good use and grow your wealth and infrastructure. Think for a moment. You are paying a company a large amount of your net worth for what in return? You are paying the mortgage institution for the hope that you can own the house in 20 to 40 years. We forget that you don't own anything, absolutely nothing, and will continue to own nothing until you pay off the debt 20 or 40 years later. Absolute insanity. Controversial alternative. Renting a property is an asset. You might think that renting gives you no benefits whatsoever, but that is definitely not true. The answer to the madness is renting to own, as it gives you as much as taking out a mortgage, however you gain so much more. The answer to the madness is renting to own. Okay, renting is liberating. It safeguards your financial freedom, while on the other hand, you are a debt slave to the mortgage company or government institutions who contracted your mortgage, taking on debt to fund a lifestyle you don't deserve yet. You can also leave at any time. If a civil war develops in your home country and you need to jump ship, renting provides the freedom while keeping the money you would have used on deposit as an escape fund. I don't know so much about that. We've had many instances of government confiscating cash accounts through devaluation or through just confiscation outright. Argentina comes to mind. That's why it's a banana republic down there. There's no way you can predict what will happen in your country financially and socially in 40 years, and a mortgage ties you down to a specific country location. Okay, I mean, I get that. That's a little bit far-fetched here, the U.S. of A. I mean, my goodness, could we have a Bolshevik revolution? Sure. Will that ruin your home value? Sure. It would ruin everything else, too. And then where are you going to go? I mean, by the way, if you need to flee the U.S. because Castro came over to go to Cuba, I don't care. You're not going to say, oh, I can't do it because I got a mortgage payment. You'll be screw the bank. I mean, come on. All right. There's a lack of appreciation for compounded interest and how it can pay for your retirement, even without needing a state pension. The best pension is a pension in which you have created your own retirement fund and built up your assets in order to continue your lifestyle after your work life. If you stick to the principles in this article, you'll be retiring a lot sooner than you would have if it took on a credit fueled approach. All right, and they talk about all right, so we talk about managing managed funds. All right, so you can purchase managed funds for a lot of providers. You can expect around 8% to 10% return. Okay, so we just talked about mutual funds. All right, so that's the drawback about the mortgage versus the investment. If you invest, you could have this, and I get all that. At the end of the day, you need a place to live. The problem with the renters is what they don't realize, that the rent will increase with inflation too. Let's not pretend that does not exist. So you renting your home today is great because you're not tied down, but don't assume that the rent will never go up, or the guy who owns the house won't sell it, and then you'll be put out because they want to put new condos in there or something like that. You have no freedom from that. You have no freedom from what happens to the landlord. No freedom from the landlord. Not when we rented, we had a drip in the roof, and the guy came out and never fixed it. You know what I'm saying? We had no freedom from the freaking the circuit breaker going down because he didn't improve the electrical system in there. No freedom from all that. What we called, and yeah, he's supposed to fix it, but he'll fix it when he's doggone ready. Of course, on top of that, he was trying to sell the house to begin with. So we're in there. He's like, I'm trying to sell it, so I'm not going to do much commitment to it. So you're renting it from me, but if I need a guy to come through here to review the home, you need to get out so I can show the home so I can sell it. That's the stuff that doesn't happen with the mortgage. So it's more than just these two guys. What my man Steve here says, what this guy writes about, it's more than the other guy had written about too, about taking on a debt. There's just a lot going on in this. At the end of the day, not having a mortgage is great. Not having a mortgage and not having a rent is great, if that makes sense. But in the interim, not having a mortgage, while it's wonderful to achieve, the only way to do it is to either not take on the debt to begin with or to pay it down early by funneling a lot of cash flow to there. And you shouldn't be doing that. Even my man Steve here, you shouldn't be doing that if you don't have an emergency fund built up. So a lot more to see this than meets the eye. So anyway, hope you like this. Don't forget to smash, share the content if you would. That helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Give me a thumbs up. That's a smash thumbs up, and then comment. All right, and don't forget to hit the bell notification. My goodness, bell notification to see my future content. We'll see you.